I'm going to start speaking as there's a pause in the admissions. I'm Ruth Kaufman, and I'm the chair of the WARAN Events Committee. And I'm just going to do the very basic housekeeping and introductions before handing over to Professor Edmund Burke to do the proper welcome and introductions. But in the meantime, you are very welcome to this first land lecture, but fourth annual autumn lecture of Women in OR and Analytics. I'm just going to do the housekeeping, as I said, and then hand over to Edmund. And then there follows the what we've described as a fireside chat with Carol Mundell and Sally Brailsford, and there'll be audience Q&A in there, followed by breakout discussion groups following up on that conversation, picking up some of the themes, and then a return to plenary for follow-up and Q&A. The times after 1600, all the times are particularly a little bit approximate till we get to 1800. That's just to give you an idea of what's likely to be coming up. It rather depends how it goes. But can I ask you, as far as possible, if you don't have anything embarrassing going on in the background, if you could keep your camera on so that we can get the feel that we are a group of people in a meeting, but your microphone off unless you are asking a question live. If you could, I haven't checked all the names as they've come in, but if need be, could you make sure that your name shows as if you were at a live event rather than something like iPad 37, which is always terribly difficult if it asks a question. But do feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself to other people, to say where you are, to make comments or to ask questions. And you will be able to raise your hand to ask questions. We're not absolutely certain how the conversation will go till Carol and Sally get going, but we're expecting it to cover things like early motivation and experiences, to cover Carol's experience of whistleblowing and sexual harassment in the workplace, and then to go on to broader areas of workplace culture and diversity and so on. And after each rough section, there should be a Q&A at that point. And as I said, we've got discussion breakouts at the end. They're as much a part of the event as the conversation. So if you can stay, we know that everybody won't be able to stay, but if you can, that would be really, really wonderful to see you all. So I'm going now to pass over to Edmund to do the proper welcome.
Thanks, Ruth. I really appreciate it. And a very, very warm welcome to you all. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to do this introduction. I'd like to welcome all the members of the OR Society, the Women in OR and Analytics Network, and to all the people who are not members but who are interested in the themes of today's event. You're all very, very welcome. The OR Society established WARAN in 2019, partly in response to research which highlighted the importance of networks in supporting women to break down some of the barriers in participation. From the start, WARAN planned to have an annual networking event with an inspiring speaker or speakers to build opportunities for meeting and sharing. The inaugural event was in 2019 at the Royal Society. And then, of course, as we all know, the pandemic happened. And that changed things for the Operational Research Society, changed things for us all. It changed things for WARAN. But they've been holding events, the network's been holding events roughly once a month since the lockdown, but sticking to the aim of having a particularly special event in the autumn. This is now the fourth in the series and the first to be named the Land Lecture. And we're really, really proud to be able to announce that today. So let me say a few words about Ailsa. Ailsa was a pioneer in OR in the UK. She carried out lots and lots of work, but I think particularly notable is her invention of branch and bound, which OR people in the audience will know is a really, really significant development. She's well known for developing computational tools, and for, I think, taking sophisticated mathematics into real practical application. It's a wonderful legacy. It's something that the UK OR community are really proud of. She's had many mentees, a great role model to a lot of members of our community. The first woman professor of OR in Britain, and the first female winner of the prestigious Operational Research Society Beale Medal. So I think at this point, what I would like to do is to welcome Frank Land, who is Ailsa's husband. I'm delighted to say that Frank's with us today. I know that other members of the family are here. You're really welcome. We're delighted to have you, and we're looking forward to this event. Not just today's event, but a future of events in Ailsa's name. It's very well deserved, and you're very welcome to the Operational Research Society meeting this afternoon. Thanks for coming, Frank, and members of the family. So you can understand that why, with this history, Warren felt that it would be fitting to name the event after Ailsa. So let me say a little bit about what Warren events are aim to do in general. The event's objectives are to make women visible as role models and contributors to OR, to explore issues affecting women, to help build and consolidate professional interaction and networking, to make sure that women's voices are heard, and to be an enjoyable event to discuss important issues. They're open to anyone, no matter what sex or gender. The Land Lecture in particular has a specific remit. It aims to invite an eminent female guest, they say every year, on a topic that's got particular resonance for women and for female representation within OR and analytics. The goal is to inspire, to inform, to support by making women visible as role models and contributors to our scientific discipline. The goal is to have the event on or around Ada Lovelace Day, the day which is of course the day for celebrating the achievements of women in STEM. So let me turn now to today's speakers. I'm really delighted to welcome our guest, Professor Carol Mundell. Carol is a professor of extragalactic astronomy and founding head of astrophysics at the University of Bath. We're very welcome, Carol. She's worked within the civil service as the first female chief scientific advisor at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, as it was called then, and the UK's first ever chief international science envoy. She's currently president of the Science Council, an umbrella body for scientific membership societies, of which the OR Society is a member. Now, rather than delivering a formal lecture, what we're looking forward to today is an event where Carol will explore some of the big themes arising from her career and activities with Professor Sally Brailsford. Many of you in the audience will know Sally, Professor of Management Science at Southampton Business School. Her achievements and positions held within the OR field are far too many to list, but like Ailsa and Carol, she too has been a role model and mentor to more people than we can readily see. So a very warm welcome to both of you. I'm really looking forward to the event, and over to you, Sally.
Great, well, thanks very much, Edmund. Thanks, Ruth, for organising the event.
I forgot to say that Edmund is the president of the OR Society and vice chancellor of Bangor University. For those who didn't know and be wondering why he's been doing it. Thank you very much, Edmund. Sorry, over to you, Sally.
Yeah, sorry about that. So it's lovely to see so many people as well. So many faces, and not just female faces. It's great to know that this event is open to everyone. So yeah, just to start our fireside chat without a fire. I mean, I always thought I had a very curious career, but Cara, your career has been amazing and incredibly varied as well, so from academia and working in government as well. But in your current role as president of the Science Council, you've obviously had to get to know about lots of different science disciplines in addition to your own. So I wondered, just to kind of kick off, could you say what appeals to you about OR? What stimulated your interest in OR in particular?
So I think there are two things, Sally. I mean, first of all, it's a great honour to be here speaking to you today, and particularly, under Elsa's namesake for this lecture. And I think that there are two things that stand out for me for operational research. There are many, many similarities with physics and the physics community, some of the positives and some of the challenges. And I think the other part, really, especially having worked in government, particularly through the pandemic and having served on SAGE, looking at the work that the Operational Research Society and its members do. I mean, you're embedded everywhere. You know, you're in the civil service, you're in academia, you're in business, and actually in some ways the unsung heroes. And so I think we're now moving into an era where we have many interconnected, globally fragile systems. We have increasing complexity in our systems. And I think we can't just intuit how those systems are going to evolve and just be kind of human about it. It's probably going to be fine. And I think when you look at the depth and the breadth of the work that your members do, and I think Elsa's career is a good example of that really fundamental research and then its application in the real world, I think is unique. And it's unsung and in some ways uncelebrated to the level that I believe it should be. And I think, Sir Patrick Vallance, as Government Chief Scientific Advisor, is often saying, are we using systems thinking here? But what does that really mean? And I think it's the OR members that really hold the key to what that practically means, both at a fundamental level and an applied level.
And it's really interesting that you mentioned SAGE, because I think it's been a bit of a criticism that OR has not been as visible in SAGE as us operational researchers think it should have been. I mean, was that your experience, or?
So I think my experience was, what struck me was the huge breadth and depth of experts and operational experts and frontline workers that we drew in. We did actually have to invent new systems within Whitehall. So the Science Advisory Group in Emergencies is not a standing group. It's actually a mechanism that the Government Chief Scientific Advisor can trigger at times of national crisis when he needs to draw complex science advice to advise the Prime Minister. And, he triggered SAGE the year before when there were heavy rains in Yorkshire and the dam was about to collapse. And so obviously I didn't serve on that SAGE mechanism because that wasn't within my area of expertise. When we heard about this unusual virus that was evolving in Wuhan, my frontline responsibility was actually to our diplomatic staff in Wuhan, and I worked with our departmental chief medical officer, bringing that expertise back from SAGE to the best of our capabilities to protect our staff, to decide whether we should evacuate them, and we started to work across a number of cities and countries. So what really struck me looking back then was how much we already had of an ecosystem that we drew on. We would never have had a vaccine if we just started to try to think of one at that point. So the fundamental research that we do in our universities and our businesses, was really harnessed, but also the whole of the research community really orientated itself. Everybody just stopped what they were doing and said, right, how do we solve this huge crisis that is coming towards us? But it was a little bit also like kind of building the plane as you fly it and trying not to lose the passengers off the side. So we actually had to step up reporting mechanisms because obviously we were so busy doing the work. Standing outside, you didn't know what we were doing. So there was something about transparency and communication. And so we also had to step up those sorts of the presentations. And if you look at the SAGE papers, the format even as to how to communicate uncertainty and confidence. And at the same time of putting into place, I think some of the testing infrastructure that, for example, the Office for National Statistics has now continued to do, again, an infrastructure that's really important for our understanding of the nature of our pandemic, not just the global pandemic. That was separate to emergency testing to tell you whether you had an infection, but to understand the dynamics. We also had to train our ministers to understand how to work in this climate of radical uncertainty. So, you know, in the past, it might be you call a science advisor and say, what's the answer here, science advisor? And you think, gosh, I need to give an answer. I'll pull together what I know. But actually what we had to teach our ministers to do was to understand what we knew, what we thought we didn't know, what we were doing to find out, and when that might be an answer, while that system was evolving and very dynamic. So we did start to grow the number of subgroups. We started to, you know, we set up an environmental monitoring group. We had our psychology group. And I think, I mean, I saw operational research as sort of embedded through that, but not as a discipline. So there wasn't the operational research subgroup. It was methods that we were using. But I still think there was much more potential to do more. And I think that's learning that we'll take forward for future crises.
No, absolutely. I mean, of course, that's really how OR started back in World War II, was bringing together a lot of disciplines to solve a very urgent, critical problem. So absolutely.
In some ways, the legacy is almost there, but we didn't put the label on it.
Yeah, indeed. Anyway, perhaps if we could just go back to the beginning, as I say, as we said, what we thought we'd do is, rather than kind of get everybody to save all their questions up to the end, we'll have sort of 3 main sections. And then if people want to stick questions in the chat, or they would like to put their hands up and ask a question, I'll stop every so often. And then you can do so. But I mean, I really would like to take you right back to the beginning, really, of your career, and sort of, you know, what attracted you to extragalactic astrophysics, and how did you get into it?
I'm going to disappoint everybody. I was not one of those children that owned a telescope. I was torn between being a ballroom and Latin American dancer or a jazz pianist, because I like music and I like dancing. But I was actually very good at maths and I love puzzle solving. So whenever I had to study and my parents said, are you doing your homework? I was like, yeah, sure. And I was just fiddling about with maths, which was really fun for me. I think my family background was very supportive. My father was a biomedical scientist, but he had gone into the National Health Service straight from school. And so he had done all of his learning on the job, so working full time and studying in the evenings. So, and, you know, I was the first child in my family to go to university. And so my parents' attitude was very much, you know, study, get an education. It's a real privilege to do that, and don't work while you do that, because that's incredibly hard. But I think always a culture where, when I ask questions as a physicist, I ask why all the time. So I imagine I was probably a very annoying child, but they always tried to find the answers, even if they didn't know the answer. So there was that, I guess, that fundamental science environment where you could puzzle things out. I went to a comprehensive school, so I didn't have any sort of special privileged educational experience, but I think the family support was very important. I was very good at physics and maths, and I studied that at the University of Glasgow. But because I had done my A-levels in England and I went to Scotland, the system there is slightly different, because children often go when they're about 17 to university in Scotland, and they have an extra foundational year. So I came with good A-level grades, and my year tutor said, well, you should really go into second year. I was enrolled to study physics and maths. And I kind of said, well, I kind of want to be a student, want to explore the city, want to have a kind of a nice time. And he said, well, okay, you can go into first year, but you have to pick a third subject. And at that point, I did ask if I could do music. And there's a little bit of snobbishness probably in the physics department. That's not a proper subject, which I didn't agree with. But anyway, so I ended up picking astronomy. And actually, I loathed it at the beginning, to be honest. It seemed so imprecise. Physics, you know, you solved an equation when you had one unknown. Astronomy, it's probably about 10, it's about 1. There are 3 unknowns, and we've got an order of magnitude. So if you get something good to a factor of 2 in astrophysics, you're made. And it was when we suddenly started to study the physics of stellar structure and evolution, and I was using my physics equations, and they were all solving, and suddenly I derived the equation of a neutron star. And, you know, thinking back, what really struck me was I was a first-year undergraduate. I went to a talk by Professor Dame Jocelyn Bell Burnell, and she had come to speak to the Astronomy Student Society. And I was just learning about neutron stars. And this incredible woman, who I knew nothing about, came in, gave this inspiring lecture about her discovery of pulsars, which of course opened up a brand new field. And many people around the world still believe to this day she should have had a Nobel Prize for that. And it was the discovery that she made at the University of Cambridge when she was a PhD student. And in the middle of her lecture, somebody rushed in and gave her a note. And it was apparently the first discovery of the fastest spinning neutron star ever. And she stopped in her lecture, and I saw her do a calculation in her head, and she went, no, that's not possible. The star would rip itself apart at that speed. And I was like, oh, my goodness me. First of all, there's a career path. Secondly, I want to have that feeling of excitement. But looking back, I only had one woman lecturer in physics for the whole of the 4 years I was at university. So all of a sudden, Jocelyn being there in my first year was really important because it showed that there was a career path if I chose to take that. But that environment was not normalized in physics in Glasgow at that time. It was a very, very, very male-dominated environment. And then I was very fortunate. I followed my career. I did a PhD at Jodrell Bank Observatory, hence the Lovell Telescope. Worked in the United States, which again, a very different science environment, very energetic, at the University of Maryland. And then I won fellowships to come back to the UK to build my groups. And now I'm at the University of Bath with a thriving brand new astrophysics research group. We founded a brand new undergraduate program. I served as head of the physics department for a couple of years before I went into government. And I think the bottom line I would say to any women or men on the call as well, when an opportunity comes, even if your instinct is to say, no, I can't do that, maybe just say yes and see where it takes you.
I mean, as you say, it's an incredibly male-dominated field. I mean, of all STEM subjects, it's probably one of the most male-dominated. I mean, what kind of issues did you encounter, or did you? I mean, I assume you did encounter issues at various stages in your career.
I did, yeah. It was very variable. I mean, I remember at high school, the physics teacher that I had at A-levels, there were only 3 girls in a class of 40. We were all teenagers. We were all shy of one another. He wasn't a particularly good teacher. And his attitude really was that girls are there to make the classroom look pretty. So he made me incredibly angry. I was incensed with fury that I was not being able to access the physics education that I wanted. He left after a year and we had a wonderful woman teacher after that. So that in some ways, that anger and the fire in my blood kept me going with physics. When I got to university, it was very different because it didn't feel openly sexist, but it was very subtle and insidious because there were no women role models. There were some young women on my course, but we weren't a majority. And so in some ways you start to internalize that. There's nothing to fight against. So that felt a little bit, uncomfortable, where you had to, garner much more energy in order to do as well as you would if you maybe had a bit of fire in your belly. But when I graduated and I went to Jodrell Bank Observatory, it was the opposite. Again, a very male-dominated environment, but wonderfully supportive. And I wasn't really aware of gender. I was doing my science, and that was wonderful. So I think there are points in your career where, you just fly. You enjoy the science. You're thinking about the ideas, and that's what research and science should really be about. And then I think as I've gone through my career, I started to become much more aware of the barriers and poor workplace behaviours. And I think when you have a poor workplace culture, it disproportionately disadvantages women and minorities. If you have a good workplace culture, it benefits everybody. And ultimately, we know that diverse teams make better judgments when everybody's feeling a little bit unusual. You connect better. You don't get groupthink. You don't get cliques. You don't get these microaggressions. And I think you're right that the field of physics is archetypally white and male. And it's been stubbornly so. The Institute of Physics has done work over many years in trying to get the number of young women undergraduate numbers up. And that alone, I think that stereotype, when you Google great scientist, it's all the bearded white men that come up, with all due respect to the men in our audience. There's a whole section of our species missing from those photographs. And that sends a very singular message back to young women and girls and their parents that there is no place for women in this field. And I think that's fundamentally wrong. Physics is a very creative field. We're all born physicists. We're all taking data in and confronting models and trying to understand our way in the world. So, I think for me, it's about breaking down those barriers. As a senior woman now, there are no senior women for me to go to and be mentored by. And so I'm having to kind of create that path, which is why I also think it's really important to have these sorts of networks. Sometimes you have to stretch beyond your field and you have to find the similarities and differences. And together you can break one another's barriers down. So I think networks are incredibly important.
No, absolutely. I mean, perhaps this is a good time if anybody has any questions in the audience. Doesn't look as if we have yet. So I think what I'll probably do now is sort of move on to the second section, which is about whistleblowing. And I know some people will already know, Carol, about your experience as a whistleblower. But I mean, would you mind just giving us a brief outline for those people who don't know?
Yeah, sure. So whistleblowing is protected under the 1998 Public Interest Disclosure Act. And for public bodies, we are governed by the Nolan principles, which are the 7 principles of public life. And I think anybody in an organisation that has tried to raise concerns about whatever level of misconduct, if they are unable to have those concerns heard, or they feel that they may be at risk of retaliation, they can lodge a complaint, raise an issue under the Whistleblowing Act. And that Whistleblowing Act is meant to protect you, protect your anonymity, and your organisation is meant to respond to that. You know, we've heard of cases in the NHS, we've heard of whistleblowing, particularly in public bodies and in the charity sector. I personally think that by the time an organisation is having whistleblowers stepping forward, there have already been many failures beforehand that grow, because whistleblowing is not easy. It's very, very stressful. And it's something that people with, you know, with good intent do as a last resort. And so my experience was that I was a senior woman academic at the university that was not Bath. And I was the only woman on the academic staff for many, many years. And it came to my attention that there was a member of staff who had been accused of sexually harassing and assaulting young women students. And I was supporting some of those postgraduate students. The organisation's processes up to that, certainly within my institute, I believe had been poor. But there was an investigation that was launched, and I was asked to be a witness at that investigation. And as I was supporting some of the women complainants, I was also receiving some information from the investigating officer. Now, you know, in fairness both to the accused and the victims, that process should have completed. It should have run its course, and there should have been a conclusion at the end of it. But what actually happened was the investigating officer decided there was sufficient evidence of serious misconduct that it would warrant a disciplinary hearing. And the alleged perpetrator was requested to come to that hearing. But in the meantime, they had accepted a position overseas and had tendered their resignation. And it was at that point when the investigating officer actually informed me that this had happened. And it was actually the deputy chief executive of the university that encouraged me to put a whistleblowing disclosure in. So you can see that it's quite a complex landscape. So I thought very carefully about it. I did. And then there was an internal investigation. At the same time, I'd also contacted colleagues in the country where the alleged perpetrator was moving to, because they were going to take up a very senior position in a major international science facility in which the UK was also a major stakeholder. And I personally had real concerns for the safety of past, present and future women. And so I did raise whistleblowing with that organisation. That organisation wrote back to my university and said, can you confirm or deny the situation? And ultimately, the job offer was withdrawn. And so I left the organisation by that stage. I've moved to the University of Bath. And, you know, long story short, my line manager in my institute had actually provided a letter of reference for the alleged perpetrator, and had decided that he was unhappy that I had raised a whistleblower, and so threatened to sue me for libel and defamation. And so I fought that case through the High Court, and I was very, very pleased to have that case struck out. So I won my case. It was struck out due to abuse of process and lack of serious harm, and went into the press. And so I think, you know, that was a journey that I wouldn't have ever chosen. But I think when you are faced with a situation of that gravity, you do the best that you can in the situation that you have. And, you know, I sort of stand by that now. I think it's really important that we have good codes of conduct, that our organisations are equipped and trained to follow those processes and procedures properly through to conclusion, both for alleged perpetrators and victims. And there has to be some closure and transparency. And it's clear that across our academic sector, there are systemic failures, and that in fact, many of our senior managers, both academic and professional services, are not necessarily trained well enough to understand how to put the right policies and procedures in place, even though they are obliged under the Nolan principles to be doing that. So there are groups like the 1752 group who have been working with the sector and with government to try to increase the better behaviours and improve cultures, and also to make sure that ultimately, you know, discrimination doesn't happen and that these hostile workplaces are fixed.
Well, it just sounds such a stressful experience for everybody. I mean, you know, did it take a lot out of you at the time? It must have been very stressful.
It was. I mean, I think, you know, obviously my family were very supportive. When we went into the lawsuit, my lawyer actually recommended that we go for strikeout, but there's no guarantee in a court, you know, so you don't know what the next steps will be, the potential financial liability that you're looking at. And again, you know, that's where I was dealing with that as a private individual, whereas actually it was an institutional failure. It should have been the institution that had dealt with that appropriately, rather than it having to be my husband and I deciding that this was the right thing to do.
So, you know, I mean, if God forbid anybody were in that position themselves, I mean, what advice would you give to them? I mean, it does seem a very, you know, brave step to take, really.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I didn't know fully what I was getting into. I did the right thing at the right time with the best of knowledge that I had. I mean, first of all, I would say do reach out for help. You know, that's where networks are important. Much earlier on in the process, I think the whistleblowing, of course, you know, with hindsight, that is something that the organisation did take the investigation through. There was a report at the end. There were some restructurings that happened, but obviously I was outside of the organisation, so I wasn't party to that anymore. And I think we do have to work with the sector to improve their policies and procedures and practices so people don't have to go through this. I think ultimately, you know, anybody who has been a whistleblower on the call, you know, it takes immense courage. And we all need to support those whistleblowers because they're not doing it for their own gratification or career development. It's an immensely difficult choice to make, but you're doing it for the good of your organization, for your profession or for your society, whatever profession you work in, because you've seen something that you believe is not acceptable and is putting potentially people's lives at risk.
Absolutely. I mean, do you think it's something that's harder for women to do?
I don't know, Sally. I don't have statistics on whistleblowing. I think it's certainly from my perspective, the women were a very, very tiny minority. And so the weight falls disproportionately on our shoulders. And to be the minority trying to fix the culture, we're not the ones that have the power, right? It's the majority who have the power. And it's really, there's a very interesting paper that was published this week from the physics community. And well, actually it was I think it's two social psychologists over in the US. And the title is How Well-Intentioned White Male Physicists Maintain Ignorance of Inequality and Justify Inaction. And it's a really interesting social science paper. So they actually interview white male physicists who say, we are good allies and we want to change things. And the bottom line of that paper is the people holding the power are the ones that express the most powerlessness. The most powerlessness. So they said, we can't do anything. We don't know what to do. Well, if you can't do something, what do you expect the minorities to have to do? So we're carrying a disproportionate weight. And I think we have to fix things together. So those men who maybe haven't been witness to this or haven't experienced or don't know what the other side feels like need to speak to their women, but then they're the ones that actually hold the power. And they need to start to transform the systems and remove the barriers.
Absolutely. I did see we had a couple of questions just popped up. I think one of them related to the previous section. Ruth, you had a question. Would you like to speak to it rather than me try and get the chat to work?
Sorry, I was just wondering, Carol, when you were in the thick of the whistleblowing, what were the rest of the senior staff in the department doing? Were they taking sides? Did they even know? Was it all confidential?
Very little was known, Ruth, and I think that was one of the real challenges. These things are not spoken about in organisations. You know, there is obviously confidentiality around these processes through HR, rightly so. But I think this is also something that organisations need to think about, that if they have a process, procedure and policies, they follow it through properly. At the end, there should be some transparency for both sides, actually. Many students have said that they struggle in universities because when they put complaints in, they never hear the outcome. Sometimes the staff are or aren't dealt with who are, you know, the alleged perpetrators. And actually they can then go on and cause significant problems throughout their profession. I mean, I work internationally and, you know, young women will come to me and say, well, I'm not going to go to that conference because it's unsafe. And so there's a lot of, if you like, quiet self-defense that happens, which is taking us away from doing the science, really. So, you know, I think it's conversations we have to have. I think bystander training is incredibly powerful because we will all have seen something in our professional lives that looked a bit odd or was a bit uncomfortable, or there was a microaggression and you walk away and think, that was odd, I'm not really sure what that was, but I wasn't equipped to know what to do. And I think bystander training is very, very powerful because we're all bystanders at some point in our life. And it then gives us the tools to be able to intervene early on. And if there are then, you know, serious things that are happening, to know how to escalate that with some confidence and with some training at our back.
So, I mean, have you found that, you know, that given this experience and the fact that you've spoken about it openly, have other people come and talk to you about problems?
Oh yeah, I get lots and lots and lots of emails. I mean, it's society, right? So, I mean, it happens. So when an organization says to me, it doesn't happen in my organization, the first thing I say is it's not whether or not it happens in your organization, because it is, it's how you respond to it when it comes to light and what you do to open those conversations to make sure that when someone is having a problem, they can raise it and resolve it quickly. So the head in the sand doesn't work. I mean, I've had some really, really heartbreaking emails from strangers, just obviously because my case was covered in the press. I think the first thing all I can do is say, you know, I'm sorry that you experienced this and that I believe you, because that also is very, very important. And if I can signpost them to some help, then I do the best that I can. But again, it's having these open conversations where people can then start to say, actually, I am having this problem and I need some support within my organization or beyond, because it's a heavy load to carry as an individual.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly for the organizations that I've been involved in, they would claim to have these processes, but whether they actually work in reality is a totally different story. And I don't know how you kind of untangle that when people say they have, you know, HR processes and that, but still these things happen. So some things, obviously, there's a disconnect somewhere. There
is, that's right. And ultimately it's leadership. You need courageous leadership because it's people and they're people systems. You know, with the best will in the world, an HR department only has so many tools. And ultimately, if managers don't use those tools, or they're not having those conversations with their staff, or they're not creating the right culture right from the beginning, by the time you are using an HR process, as I say, something's failed earlier on. And it can be small things that you can nip in the bud. You can have these conversations. You can do your staff culture surveys, even if they're anonymous, and say, actually, I'm not aware of this problem because I'm not the demographic who's the target here. Or you hear things, don't dismiss them, don't laugh things off. Say, do you want to have a conversation? Make a space where people can have these conversations. And, you know, I think ultimately the policies, the procedures, when you do get to a crisis point, organizations often turn to expediency. They think of reputational harm and they make poor decisions because they're not thinking about the actual people. We're humans, real living, feeling humans. We become dehumanized in the system, and it's very much about, you know, how do we manage the potential reputational harm rather than how do we do the right thing?
Absolutely. I see there's a question from Benjamin, which actually kind of links better to the first session, actually, Carol, but if you don't mind,
sure, please do.
Which is about what should be done in our schools to encourage more girls into STEM.
Well, that's a huge question, Benjamin. We're doing lots and lots of things. Again, I think those societal stereotypes, if all you ever see are male physicists or, you know, the lone white genius male is a very difficult trope. I've worked with a lot of girls from the youngest all the way up. And they're bright, they're smart, they want to do science. When they're very young, they do it with the boys. So I gave a talk to a fairly small school, but I started with 3-year-olds and went up to the 15-year-olds. And the pupils were brought in mixed groups, but they were brought in different age sections. And obviously the sort of the 3 to 6-year-olds, they're bouncing everywhere. They've got lots of questions, which is wonderful. We did black holes, we did planets, we did the universe. The sort of 7 to 9-year-olds, you know, are equally excited, and they're all mixed together. And they all kind of, you show them a black hole and they all go, ooh, together. So there's already some collective response. By the time I got to the early teens, and I'd met some of these young women, teenagers, sort of out in the playground, bright, smart, wanted to chat to me about science. You then hit that mixed environment, and the boys sat on one side, the girls sat on the other, and the girls were very shy. This was a confident school. They were bright young women, but they were quite shy. And then as you got to the 14 and 15-year-olds, the boys were asking some of the sassy questions, you know, and the girls were just sitting quietly, not asking anything. And so you start to see that it was just a small subset. And I know that, you know, young women who are in all girls schools will disproportionately pick the STEM subjects. So I think there's an awful lot about working with families, about, you know, a whole science communication ecosystem. So we have a wonderful system in the UK. We have great museums and we have really good programs. You know, everybody's watched David Attenborough, for example. So you get science for free in our culture. Whether girls and young women then want to go and study it, I think that's for the education system, and also support to teachers to say that there are diverse pathways into science. And also it doesn't have to be straight from school. And that's the other thing that I'm working on, you know, my role in the Science Council, is that there are lots of different pathways into STEM. You might come through a technician pathway, you might come through a non-science pathway, you might come through social science or arts or humanities or the creative arts. You know, there are now so many different ways that science sits within professions and also within society. We need a science educated population because we want to make decisions about our own lives. So for me, it's about science and society rather than a sub branch where we think about whether boys or girls do it, but we have to again break down some of those visual stereotypes as well.
Yeah, I mean, I went to an all-girls school and I often wonder if I would have ended up doing maths if I hadn't. I think, you know, totally, something happens to kids when they get to about that 12 or 13, isn't there? Yeah, so, okay, so Isabel says her physics class was separated by gender into 2 rooms. That sounds a really good idea, which made it a more popular choice for girls. But she says not a huge amount of data is collected. Are you aware of any?
So I was going to say mainly between schools. I mean, certainly when I was head of physics in Bath, I think we saw young women intake go up to about 33%. The national average was the low 20s. I didn't do a detailed analysis, and I haven't done an analysis since, but I will go back and do that. I don't know whether that was just because I was a head of department and I was standing there, you know, every Saturday talking to families about the opportunity to do physics and astrophysics. I talked about my science and I just lived it. Rather than talking about, you know, gender and sex in physics, I was just a woman physicist. So I think that may have helped. We've kept those statistics, possibly. I need to go back and look. I think the thing I did hear from my young women, so I had a very bright bunch of 4th year women undergraduates who came to me and said, we'd like to set up a network for women in physics. Would you support us? So I got them some training about governance. I got them some funding and asked them to make sure that their structure was sustainable so that when they left at the end of the year, the network wouldn't disperse. And it's kept on going. It's been absolutely fantastic. And they came in, and some of them had been to all girls schools, some of them hadn't. But the ones who'd been to all girls schools said when we arrived in undergraduate physics, it was a terrible culture shock. We're just like, my God, where have all the women gone? So you hit it at some point. And I think the later you hit it, the more resilient you are and the more self-confident you are in your belief that you have the right to be there. So I think we have to keep on pushing the boundaries there and saying, actually, you know, we've now got more girls and women and we just keep growing the pot.
Yeah, there's some really interesting comments coming through about people, the different educational experiences, and a long comment from Ben. Thanks Ben. I agree. We probably don't have time to go through all that now, but
just passing that, Ben. Yes, I'll read these.
Yes.
I'll read these offline.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's a really, you know, as I said, I mean, I didn't do physics actually. I did Russian, so that was a bit bizarre at school. But as I say, I think it was a bit of a culture shock then going to university and being very much in the minority. So I think it hits you no matter what stage it hits you at. It's in a discipline.
I'm trying to make a suggestion which is appropriate to this discussion at this particular moment. I'm afraid I can't type. My eyes don't let me type, so I have to speak. We've, in our society, we've just published a book of reflections and from people of their living experience. That kind of book, which is oral histories, recollections, people talking about what happened to them in their events, would be a very useful book for this kind of the things we're discussing at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Our book, like this is the book. It's about my own period in computing, but simply the recollections of people. We're talking about the recollections of people, but publish it as a book.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Frank. And actually, I was really privileged this year to be included as a chapter in a book called The Sky is for Everyone. And it's women astrophysicists from around the world who published their PhDs from 1966 to 2010. So you have an international view, and you also have 60 years worth of history. So in the 1960s, these brilliant women couldn't go to telescopes to do their observations unless they took their husband with them. And so you now see how that culture has changed, but you also see the things that haven't changed. And I've spent the whole summer, I was really humbled to be in the book. And I have to say, Frank, I mean, I'm a physicist, I like equations, but writing about myself was the hardest thing I have ever done. But it was really lovely because I had to step away, I think, from some of the negatives and actually think, what's the essence of me as a scientist? What story do I want to tell about my experience and in my voice? And the editors were really, really kind and supportive. And they said, we want to capture these women's voices. We don't want to write this for them. And so each chapter is in that woman's voice. And there are women in that book who were icons in my field when I was a research student, and I read their research papers, but I never had the courage to contact them. And it's only now that we're in a book together, and many of them have retired, that I've now reached out to them and said, I read your amazing chapter, and we're now starting to have some dialogue. So you're right, there are stories underneath even those chapters which only really scratch the surface. So speak to people across the generational divide. And I think that vertical learning is also really, really important across any gender.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, while we're on the subject of workplace culture, perhaps we could move into the third broad area, Carol, which is your move out of academia into government and the civil service. First of all, what prompted the move?
What prompted me was a very persistent agency who were recruiting to the role. So I was head of physics at the time. I had a very busy job. I was also building my astrophysics research group and doing various international leadership roles. And this sort of very persistent and canny lady at the agency who was filling the role kept emailing me, and I kept deleting the email, not thinking it was a thing. I knew about the government chief scientific advisor role because I'd worked previously with Sir David King when I was a junior researcher, but I didn't know that individual government departments had their own chief scientific advisors. And so eventually she phoned me and she said, can I just ask, are you deleting my emails? And I was like, kind of, yeah, because I don't think you're really speaking to me. She said, this is the problem. When I reach out to senior women, they don't believe it. Will you come to London for a chat? So we met up, she looked at my CV, we had a conversation, and she persuaded me to put an application in. I went through quite a rigorous selection process, very interesting process where I was doing all sorts of things I'd never done before, but I was bringing together many of the skills that I had inadvertently developed through my career. And then I was really pleased and excited and rather stunned to be offered the position. It was very interesting because it was completely different to anything I'd ever imagined doing. It was also part-time. So I saw another axis of difference. So suddenly I was a part-time academic 2 days a week back in Bath and 3 days a week in Whitehall. And there are some barriers to being a part-time woman, even at a senior level as well. And I learned a lot about foreign policy, and it was, I would say it's probably the most exciting and terrifying thing I've ever done in my life. I worked through Brexit. I had a number of priority countries. I led the Science and Innovation Network, which is a network of 100 science and innovation attaches embedded in all of our embassies around the world. I think the UK is unique in having that network for science diplomacy. And I was head of the global science and emerging technology departments. And obviously I served on SAGE through the pandemic, which again, very humbling to see the incredible work, not only of our scientists and our science communities, but our health workers and our civil servants working 24/7, under great pressure, having already done Brexit, to really, tackle this incredibly challenging problem and, threat to life. So it was a very fast-paced job. I had a wonderful team. I learned a lot from them. Reverse mentoring is also something that's really, really valuable. And the other thing I think that struck me about the Foreign Office was that it was very optimistic in the sense of talking about culture change in an organization. So back in the 1970s, if a woman diplomat got married, she had to resign from the diplomatic service. Right up until 1994, you could not be gay and in the Foreign Office. And all of a sudden, the leadership there decided, actually, we are such a backward department that we have to do something very, very transformational. They worked across all of the staff networks. So by the time I joined, we already had women ambassadors in very senior posts. And I think we now have women ambassadors in all of our major posts. And that was because of the talent pipeline, because of the culture. It wasn't just insert a woman in a senior post and tick a box. It was the whole ecosystem, and it was years and years and years of work on culture change. So I found it a very inclusive, positive place, but also a place where we could have really difficult conversations and have them frankly, which I think is also very transformative.
So, it sounds as if they're a bit more forward thinking than academia, would you say? Would you think academia could learn from the way these issues are tackled in
I would definitely, Sally. And I also think in industry, there are many industries that have also been more progressive than academia. And, I think academia are coming to it late. I have hope that we will transform for the better. And yeah, I think across the whole of the civil service, there was that culture, because really the civil servants, we are the equivalent to professional services staff in academia. Relative to academics, the equivalent to academics in the civil service, of course, are our ministers. And, sometimes we see in the universities as well that our professional services staff do have really strong culture of effective behaviours, but sometimes they can be treated quite badly by academics. And so I think, you can look at one part of your system, say we've got a great culture, but then it interfaces with another part, and you also have to continue to drive that change. I think we've seen that manifest in our observations of what's been happening in government over the last year or so, and change of Prime Minister.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but I mean, do you think also is because, that sort of culture that academics basically think they can get away with things because that's the way the world is, sort of thing? I mean, do you think that is going to change? I mean, it seems that once you've got into a sort of position of power like that, where you seem to be untouchable, it's really difficult to break that down?
I think it is changing, Sally, but it has to be consciously changed. So certainly at the Science Council, we have a very strong code of conduct. So we hold the register for registered scientist, registered science technician, chartered science teacher, and chartered scientist. And I know in many professions, those qualifications are very highly sought after and highly respected, and internationally, actually. And I think standards and regulatory frameworks that keep all of our systems safe and secure are actually very important. A code of conduct and integrity sits at the heart of that. So I'm hopeful that we will help vice chancellors, and we have Edmund on the call here, persuade vice chancellors that actually that professionalisation of our academic workforce is actually really important for us to be academics. We're not saying that you stop being academics, you stop being, creative forces and thinking of new ideas. But actually, it's not okay to abuse your students or disrespect your colleagues. It's just basic professional conduct in the workplace.
So, I mean, do you think there's anything that academia could teach the civil service, or do you think we're a long way behind?
No, I think so. My civil service colleagues ask me that too. What can we learn from academia? So I think, we have a really strong knowledge creation culture in academia. And I think the way we approach, like the scientific method, for example, this was something, again, that as chief scientific advisors, we were helping our civil service departments to do. So very bright people with all sorts of backgrounds. But actually, how do you challenge the underlying assumptions? How do you work in that political environment where you are serving your ministers, but you actually have to go away and think about whether your data are robust and how you make decisions? So a lot of that, I think that's science advice for policy making, that evidence-based policy making is something that the academic sector has a huge amount to contribute to. And in fact, I drew on a lot of the research from the academic sector. There's so much actually that we need those evidence syntheses. There's almost a knowledge brokerage role missing, I think, in between. A busy civil servant, a desk officer will not have time to read one research paper, but they'll be very, very interested in reading an academic review article that pulls together that. So I think there's a huge appetite in the civil service for good knowledge, and helping them connect with academia is something that I think we could do.
I was also interested in you were talking about being part-time in 2 different jobs. I mean, my experience of that is that you end up doing, more than half of each of them. I mean, do you think that's harder for women than for men to do that because they also have the other things that women are supposed to be doing? Or do you think we're brilliant at multitasking, so
apparently multitasking is a myth. It's just very, 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 very serial tasking. So I learned a lot about ways of working in the civil service, ultimately because my workload was so high and I sort of hit a cognitive overload point. Some of that was because we were in lockdown, so we transformed all of our teams working. We were doing everything remotely, and suddenly all of my in-country diplomatic visits, we had to reimagine how to do those digital, and it took us a little bit of time to think about how to do that. And also I had to learn what I needed in order to be mentally alert. And what I discovered was that actually multitasking and context switching was a huge tax cognitively for me. So I could do so much, and then I became much slower and much less effective. So if I was working on policy papers or strategies within Whitehall, yes, you can always step up to an emergency and throw the extra mile at it, but actually routinely you can't do that. So my team was very good at figuring out how I worked best, how to get the best out of me, and then we were very, very tactical and strategic about that. So I could produce a huge amount, I could do it with huge energy and at great speed, but I also had to understand when I couldn't do any more FaceTime and I needed quiet time to think deeply. And we figured out really that I was able to do sort of digital in-country visits, and I could do all of these, providing I had a little bit of downtime in between each, providing I had some space to mentally go to the country, which is something I could never have imagined from my academic experience. I needed some kind of ritual where I sort of disconnected from family, imagine getting on the plane, went through all those rituals, and then I was mentally in the zone, even though I was actually sitting in my study during lockdown. And then to come back to my physical space. So I wasn't checking my university email while I was doing my Foreign Office job. I kept quite a clear divide between those. And I think in academia, we tend to overfill our calendars. So, you know, we'll fill ourselves to 120 capacity and think we can just squeeze even more in. And I still do that as an academic. And I have to keep reminding myself that makes me a less effective person. And it makes me a less effective colleague if I don't put good boundaries down.
Mm. I think that's, I do think that's one of the challenges with academia, is that the job doesn't really have boundaries like that. And I think it's, a certain amount of self-knowledge, which people often find quite difficult to actually to realize. And I think, I totally agree that online meetings has made it much worse, because you don't even have time to walk from one room to another one between meetings.
I think, Sally, you make a really good point there about the job doesn't have boundaries. I don't think anything naturally has boundaries. I think you actually have to define those boundaries. And I learned that from actually a couple of my colleagues in my team in the Foreign Office. And we were, we had a huge volume of work to do, both responsive and also strategic. And the Foreign Secretary at the time, his team had sent a question to me on a Thursday night. So my hours were Tuesday to Thursday. My team, we always horizon scanned. We had clear objectives. We were very, very efficient because we also had a heavy workload, and we wouldn't have been able to function if we didn't really think about these things and constantly adjust our processes. And I had a request in from the Foreign Secretary's office to answer a question about our science strategy, which was actually turned out to be a very deep question. And his team had sent an email on the Thursday night saying, can you do this for Monday morning? So the academic in me went, gosh, okay, well, how do I fit this in? Right, I'll move my academic work from Friday to Saturday. I'll catch up on Sunday. I'll deliver it for Monday morning. And it was actually my team who said, we're not going to take that work on tonight because you don't work Fridays, but we will scope out the work on Tuesday to figure out what resource we need to put into it when you're back into the office. And the reason for that was one of my team members was organising a COVID distanced funeral because he'd lost a close family member. And one of our other team members, their father was on end of life care. Now, the team was managing that and hadn't told me, but at that point, they realized they had to tell me. And I have to say, Sally, it was a sharp email and it stung. And I was like, ouch. But I said to that colleague, thank you so much for having the courage to be able to check me and tell me to put boundaries down. Because if I didn't put boundaries down, then I was actually stepping on all my team's boundaries too. And they were a great team. And what that did was it gave me my academic Friday back. It let me have my family time on Saturday and Sunday. I came back to my academic work on Monday refreshed, and on Tuesday I was ready to hit the ground running. And in fact, the work, when we scoped it out, was actually a month's worth of work. It was not a weekend. It wasn't urgent, and we did a much better piece of work later. So knowing and giving yourself the permission to put the boundary down, because we all work hard, we all go above and beyond, and we're not saying a work to rule, we're actually saying what is humanly reasonable, and beyond that, when do I stop being effective for my organization?
No, I mean, I think that's, at whatever level, really. I think learning that it's a tough lesson, I think.
It is, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So we had a question from Benjamin. It says, what is cognitive overload? Would you like to give a definition, Carol?
Oh, well, I think they're probably the most graphic way I could describe it is a little clockwork monkey with a pair of cymbals going gang, 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 gang in your head. So you just can't settle to have a thought. And I think probably I'd hit that point maybe halfway through lockdown. We had SAGE. I was doing in-country diplomacy visits. I was supporting our ambassadors on a kind of a 24/7 cycle with the science advice for their countries. And I had a strategy paper that had come in and under some time pressure to read and comment. And I just found I couldn't make sense of what I was reading. And my brain constantly interrupted itself. And I just ended up kind of paralyzed. And at that point, I thought, right, I'm just going to step away from this for half an hour and think about how I can restructure it so that I can be more effective. And what I realized is it takes a lot of adrenaline to do in-person performances or whatever. And you need to think and prepare for that. So I could do a run of that for a week. I could live on that adrenaline. The following week, then, I needed some quiet time to do reading, to do thinking. And for my internal voice, to start to come back, because there was just kind of white noise in my head. And I needed that peace and quiet to think deeply about things. Then my creativity came back and I was able to contribute back to my team on strategy. And then the following week, we could step up performance again. It's a simple example, but I also sometimes, you know, I love to connect with people. I love to do this kind of thing in person or remotely. But also I learned that I also really need to have alone time. I need to be quiet. I need to not have to engage with other people, maybe just dark room quietly in my head. I never knew that I had that side of me. And I think we probably all have a mix of different balance of those parts of ourselves. So stepping away and recharging your batteries, I think, is really important. And it's not the same as sleeping. Sleeping is really critically important for your health and well-being, but I found I wasn't sleeping either because my brain didn't stop. But when I really needed my brain to do something under pressure, it just stalled. So that's, I don't know if that's a scientific definition. I'll have to speak to a psychologist and actually understand whether that is cognitive overload, but it just felt kind of mentally paralyzing. It's almost like a panic in your head where you think, I really have to form a thought because I'm under time pressure, but I can't find any grasp of that thought. So it's just stopping and letting some peace settle down.
Yeah, and certainly for me, it's when I know I can't make up my mind which of the 12 important things I've got to do is the most important. Whichever I do, I feel guilty that I'm not doing the others, and you end up not doing any of them.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think we've all been there at one level or another. You know, and the point Ruth makes as well about, you know, about people with families, I think exactly the same. You're spending time with your children or your parents, whatever life stage you're at, and you think, yes, I should be working. And when you're working, you think, oh gosh, I should be spending time with my children or my parents. So yeah, I think it's it's a really difficult thing to learn what works for you and what, you know, as you've described, sort of you need your downtime and your dark room.
And also it changes with time.
Variants of that, I think, and learning what that is really important.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, when my children were small, I had family support. I was building a brand new research group. I was younger. It was a joy to be with them. It was a switch off from my work to be with them. Sometimes they helped me with my science. It was exciting. You know, they're teenagers now, and they in some ways need me less and in some ways need me more. And they're understanding in the sense that they say, well, mummy's working, so don't bother her. But actually that can end up with me overworking. And so it is really helpful, as you say, to learn about those dynamic boundaries. You might have elderly dependents who rely on you and you also want to spend time with them, but you might also be looking after, say, their finances or their health and welfare, as well as your own finances and health and welfare. So I think there's something about pace, and there's also asking for help. And I think if you can say that, if you are in a good workplace culture, to be able to say to a colleague, I'm actually having a really difficult time right now. I'd like a little bit longer. Is it really critical? Is this deadline time critical? Or actually, is there a bit of stretch on that? And I think when you can articulate that, often people will say, actually, me too, let's stretch the deadline a bit.
Absolutely. There's a comment here from Catherine as well, agreeing, say, great personal experience of self-awareness. Any tips for others on becoming more aware of their limitations?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way to do this in my personal experience is think about when you're happy, think about when you feel excited and energized. And I, you know, for a lot of my work in the Foreign Office, I was incredibly energized and the workload was huge. And there have been other times, maybe when I've done something in academia, I've been similarly energized, but other times where I've just found it like a slog up Mount Everest without oxygen. And I thought, why is this so hard? Sometimes you can step back and say, actually, the system is poor. I've been asked to engage with an arbitrary set of rules that make no sense to me, or a computer system that's purely designed. And actually that's someone else's way of thinking that doesn't work for your way of thinking. And that's when to say, I need some help, I maybe need some training, or I need some time while I figure this out. I can't do it as quickly as you because I haven't been doing it for the last 6 months and got it off at my fingertips. So I think figure out where you get your energy from, and also identify what saps your energy. Sometimes you have to engage with that because it's something that has to be done, but be aware of that, so that when you are feeling low in energy, think, what caused that? Is it natural? I just need to sleep more, I eat better, look after myself? Or is there something systematic? You know, it might be a friend who you're always giving to and you never seem to get any energy back. It might be a particular colleague and their behavior. And sometimes having that conversation can just be really helpful for both of you.
Yeah, there's a comment here from Margaret, says that what I learned from this, it's okay to admit cognitive overload, and that most of us, we don't give ourselves permission to do that because we fear others' judgment. I think that's very true.
It's very true. Yeah, absolutely. And I think for women as well, Sally, you asked me, do you think it's worse for women? Women in a male-dominated field, you think you have to be superwoman. If you show so much as a vulnerability, you finished. And I think it takes huge courage and self-awareness to say, actually, I'm vulnerable. Don't exploit it. You know, I'm now going to take some time for myself, or I'm going to do this in a different way. I'm still going to deliver to you, but we're going to do it this way because this makes me more effective. And you don't get to micromanage the way I deliver to you as long as you get my deliverables.
No, I think that's a fantastic thing. There's a comment, was a question actually from Benjamin about reverse mentoring. Could you tell us a bit more? What impact has this had in your organisation?
So reverse mentoring really is when you learn from junior or younger colleagues or colleagues who are very different to you. So may have had a very different lived experience, a different background, different ethnicity or sexual orientation. And I think there are some organizations that do this very consciously. So they will put out, senior people will put a call out and say, would you like to not, volunteer to be my reverse mentor mentee? Other ways you can do it organically. So I have quite a lot of mentees in Bath and beyond and around the world. Some of it parts of official systems like the Aurora system that the Advanced HE organise for universities and professional services. Other times it's just I've done something like this and said, if you see a senior woman, reach out. Somebody reaches out. And I've learned so much from my junior colleagues and young women coming into my field, seeing the field very differently to the way I saw it. So I think it's really important that I don't say as a senior woman, this is how it is, these are the solutions, and it's all rigid, because actually things change. So I'm learning a lot from my young women postdocs and students when they say, could we do it this way or why don't we do it that way? And I think, well, that's a really good question. Why not just try a different way of tackling this barrier?
And I think one of the things is that when you've had to struggle yourself to, against the systems and whatever they were sort of back in the 80s and 90s, and you then, in a sense, you're having a different experience with people now. And I think there's a great tendency particularly amongst people my age to think, oh, it's so easy now. And actually, I think it's much harder. But when I really think about it, I think things have got a lot harder for young people or young women or really anybody, who's working in an environment where they feel that they're not really appreciated or understood. I think it's I think there's a sort of tendency to say, okay, now come and suck it up, get on with it. I did it. I got there. But
yeah, I think that stifles progress. I mean, I think it's differently difficult, right? I think there are some structural barriers that are the same generation after generation. So when I speak to women ahead of me who've maybe been the only woman in their field and they've seen some of these bad behaviors, there was one, senior woman in physics I spoke to a few years ago, and I gave a talk at a workshop, and it was the young women who were just, why are things not changing, damn it? And it was this much more senior woman physicist who came to me afterwards and said, thank you for your talk. You've made me think very differently. And it's the young women who've actually given me the confidence that we will make change. And I've realized I am in a position of power and influence, and I'm going to go and try and make some change. I've got a difficult case I'm dealing with, and I'm going to go and tackle it differently. And again, it's those connections across the generations, because that we will all have different lived experiences, men or women. We will have different ways of having tackled them and different degrees of success. So I don't think anything's easier or harder for anybody. It's just different. We're all trying to make our way the best way we can in the world. And ultimately, we're facing big global challenges like climate change. And also difficult can mean different things in different contexts. I know I'm privileged. I have electricity, I have security, I have warmth and food. That's not true for everybody in the world.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps if we just sort of move to the oh gosh, there's a long question here. Sorry. Sorry.
Feedback.
My mouse dies every now and again. I'm trying to scroll up to see the
is it Emily?
Shall I read it out?
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
It's Emily McGovern. Says, do you have any tips about how to give feedback upwards to a reverse mentor? Someone I mentor, a female person I mentor, has a reverse mentor, male, and the relationship is not what she expected. She thought it was going to work both ways, but he hasn't provided opportunity to hear from her or learn from her experience. He also seems to just give his view rather than coaching her.
Well,
there's a big problem for you to solve, Carol. Off you go.
Wow. Well, I don't know that obviously the individual circumstance. I think in that case, first of all, mentorship doesn't have to be for life, right? And I think there are some really clear principles when mentoring, sponsorship, and coaching are 3 different things. And I think when you first start in a mentor relationship, it's really good to put the ground rules down. So is this a finite relationship? Will we have 2 or 3 sessions? Will it run for a period of time? Is there something particular that we want to get out of this relationship? When we've done that, we'll close it and wish one another good luck. I think one of the challenges, if somebody enters a reverse mentoring relationship and they're actually selling themselves to the senior person, then that's not a mentoring relationship. So it shouldn't be about career progression. It's actually about learning from one another. I think if the ground rules haven't been put down right at the beginning about what each wants to get out of it and about what the transaction will look like, then that already puts you in a difficult position. And I think it might be really good for your friend or colleague, Emily, to say, we've had X number of sessions. It's been really interesting. What I'd like to do now is redefine, having done this is what I've got out of it. I'd like to hear what you've got out of it. And now let's just talk about how long we will remain in this mentor situation and what we might still want to get out of this relationship, or have we achieved all our objectives? And if it's just a kind of a polite exit, that might help them exit the situation, or it might open up a really honest conversation with that junior man who might say, well, actually, I haven't got anything out of it because I've been saying this and you haven't been listening, or what did you want out of it? So I think it might, again, it's opening up that frank conversation where you say, this is what it's felt like for me. How has it felt like from you? What do you think you've achieved? And this is what I would still like to get out of it. Is this something that you're keen to continue to engage with me on? Or do you think that our mentor journey's run its course? Because it can be sometimes good just to move on.
It's interesting, Emily, that I teach a course to our PhD students called Managing Your Supervisors. And one of the things I talk about is ground rules, and the fact that you can talk about the ground rules at any stage. And it's easy to talk about it at the beginning because you're setting everything down, you've got a blank sheet of paper. But if things are not working the way that the student would feels they're getting, supervisions are not satisfactory, it's absolutely fine at any point to say, can we just have a chat about how things are working? And I think, there's a real power imbalance between a PhD student and supervisors, particularly if the student's quite new and the supervisor's an eminent professor. But I think it's a case where you're actually in an equal partnership because both of you want something out of it. And, it's up to both sides of that partnership to make it work. And if it's not working, then, nuclear option, get a new supervisor. But I think it's much better to be able to talk openly and honestly about, how things at the moment are not really working. And I totally agree, Carol, what you said there sounds very diplomatic, and nobody could possibly take offense. But I think it's like any sort of relationship, which, being a mentor or being a mentee is beneficial to both sides. Everybody should be getting something out of it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thanks very much. I was going to wind up by just asking you what you're hoping to achieve, just a sort of general question, looking to the future, what you're hoping to achieve in your term of office as president of the Science Council. And in particular, I guess, in relation to some of the issues, the cultural issues that we've been talking about.
Yeah, so I'm really hoping that the professional conduct will be something that we'll be able to engage universities with, help them also to learn from one another in a bit more of a collaborative way. I think also the thing I'm really keen on are those diverse pathways into science. So we know the Science Council has curated the 5 years of the Technician's Promise. And I was really privileged to speak at the inaugural conference of the Herschel Leadership, Women Leaders in Technical Leaders, Women in Technical Leadership, I think is the title, in the summer. And that's a wonderful program that's actually led by Kelly Vere and sponsored and funded by Research England. And again, making visible those women technical leaders, because again, technicians within our university sector, I think, are the unsung heroes. We don't do any of our science, doesn't matter how fancy we think we are as an academic, we're not doing anything unless we have really highly qualified technicians. And technicians that work to the highest code of conduct. You know, if you go for a medical test, how do you believe the result if you don't think that the lab staff are, you know, behaving properly? And we know that our labs have very, very high standards, and we have accreditation for those labs, for the programs and for the people. So for me, I think, you know, that the big theme here is trust in science and trustworthiness of science, and that goes right down to the quality of our systems, the integrity of our people and their behaviours. So I think it can't be overstated how important it is. It's not just the right thing to do, but it's about the good of science and how it impacts society. So that's sort of two of the big things, the diverse pathways and that trust in science are really the two core things that we're working on in a variety of different ways, supporting our membership organisations, bringing those organisations together, which we did a couple of weeks ago for our climate conference, which was really exciting. And we had so many different sectors there. I mean, for example, connecting your society with the natural scientists who were thinking about systems thinking. I said, have you spoken to the OR Society? And they were like, no, we know they're in the club and we should go and have a chat. So, well, they have the mathematical underpinnings. Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't try and do this research. Speak to your colleagues. So I'd love to increase that connectivity across the Science Council family. Obviously, you know, ensure that the Science Council as an organisation is sustainable for the future. But that power of the interdisciplinary collaborations and connections, I think, you know, is huge potential yet to be exploited. So yeah, really wonderful bunch of societies and lots of power for good to make our world a better, more stable and sustainable place.
So how do you think we academics can contribute to that? Us jobbing academics, that is.
I think you can contribute in all sorts of ways. So I think that interdisciplinary thinking, the problem is when you say interdisciplinary research or science, people get very threatened because they think we all have to become generalists. And certainly my experience on stage was we could not have done our interdisciplinary work if we didn't have the world's best deep subject matter experts. So I think you must, you know, be excellent at what you do, the thing you have a passion for, but step out of your comfort zone and go and communicate what you do with people who are not like you. And then you start to discover that actually you maybe are trying to do similar things, but you have different approaches, or you have different terminology for it, or somebody has the piece of the jigsaw that is missing from your puzzle. And for me, it's just such an exciting thing to do. We're all so busy. We all have our heads down. And actually the joy of academia is you're surrounded by all these great thinkers in different fields. So just step out of your office and walk to somewhere you've never been on your campus and knock on somebody's door if you can, or go to a coffee room and say, this may sound bizarre, but I'd like to introduce myself and find out what you work on. Have you got 5 minutes? It sounds daring. You do that and suddenly you're starting to create networks. So we can do that in our individual lives. We can do it across our departments, our organizations beyond and internationally, or we can do it through our professional societies. So give yourself, I don't know, a little time each week to treat yourself to meet somebody new, I think, digitally or in person.
This is a bit sort of flavour of the month, this sort of being interdisciplinary. And I've often heard people say it's risky because, you know, in order to get promoted and to get jobs, if you're a postdoc, you need to have papers in, you know, the prestigious journals in your field. But if you're interdisciplinary, you often publish in, you know, the wrong journals. And, you know, you're kind of, as you say, it's not so much that you're, you know, trying to be a super person, but it's just that you're not right at the cutting edge of your own discipline. I think that's quite a difficult tension for people, and particularly for sort of, I would say, for postdocs, that kind of stage in their career before they've really established their own.
I think it depends on what you're trying to do. So, you know, I'm a physicist, I'm an astrophysicist, I do astrophysics research. Certainly we struggled with this in the REF. As CSAs, we were looking across this piece, how do we assess interdisciplinary research? Because something in your field might be mundane, but when you apply it to another field, it becomes revolutionary. But then that field hasn't recognized how revolutionary it is. So you might be far ahead of the game. And I think for junior scientists, unfortunately, you probably do have to apply your trade. You do have to show that you are a leading discipline specialist. I think if you have an opportunity to do something, I have a postdoc who's a brilliant astrophysicist in my group, and she just spent 6 months on a funded fellowship with the Royal Society. And it was a policy placement. She was really keen to do it. Not everybody's interested. Everybody shouldn't have to do the same thing, but it was around space. And so she brought her expertise. She learned a lot. She learned different ways of working. And she's now she did extend her postdoc. So it wasn't, instead of doing science, it was a stretch in the postdoc. She's now come back with many new ideas and different ways of communicating. So she will still publish in astrophysics journals. She will also write a policy paper. So in some ways, she's not suddenly going to become a policy advisor. She's still an astrophysicist, but she's seeing how her astrophysics can be applied, and the way she thinks can help other people to deliver on their objectives. And she's then part of something bigger. She enjoys it. She's got a lot of energy. She's found it very exciting, and she will now go on and get an astrophysics fellowship. So I think it's, what do we do that's wonderful? What do we love doing? And is there anybody else who could benefit if we shared a little bit of it? So I'm never going to be a biologist. I'm never going to be an immunologist, but I've learned how to read all those papers, and I've learned how to understand that environment within SAGE and ask good questions. So yeah, I think an interdisciplinary scientist, I'm not sure if there are many of those. And it's not the same as being a generalist. I think we are all specialists in something, but can we talk across the boundaries?
Okay, I can see, I'm looking at the time, I can see it's probably time to start hand back to Ruth. I'd just like to say it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you, Carol. So I've really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, Sally. It's been a real honour, and great questions as well from your audience.
We as OR people should be quite good at being interdisciplinary, because OR is such a broad, if I'm ever asked to define it, you always end up with having a long argument about what OR actually is. So I think
you may be the epitome of interdisciplinary scientists, exactly. But also, as I say, deep subject matter experts, because you're the ones that underpin all of our systems and whether we're doing things right or wrong. So yeah, I think it's a wonderful field.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Ruth. Back to you.
Thank you. And if that was fantastic, as you will have seen from some of the thank yous in the chat, but if people would like to unmute so that they can applaud, that'd be quite nice. So thank you both, Sally and Carol.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to try to share my screen now. Please don't go. I'm just going to talk about what happens next. A lot of people have had to leave, and I know it's a long session, 4 till 6, but I do hope you can stay if you can, if you've got the time, because we would like to move on to having some chat between ourselves in breakout rooms. There is a little bit more housekeeping first, and then I'll come on to the breakout rooms. So if you can just stay for the housekeeping, even if not the breakout rooms. I have put the feedback form link into the chat, so I hope it's the same link that I've put in. Because it's really helpful to us to know what you've thought of events so that we can help design future events. What we have coming up, 17th of November, 1:30, a discussion on menopause, which will be a little bit of talking and a little bit of discussion. And then in the middle of December, we have a Christmas social, which we hope will be what we're calling hub and spoke. So you can get together in workplaces, but link through to the central online. So if you're individuals or if you're a workplace that wants to be connected, we can get together. And then 2023, we're aiming for the third Thursday at 13:30 for most of our sessions. That's the third Thursday of the month at 13:30. So even though we can't tell you exactly what's happening yet, please do save the date. So that's the adverts for what's coming next. And then we're moving on to breakouts. And I'm delighted to say that Carol and Sally can both stay with us for the breakouts. And I know Sally does have to leave on the dot of 6, so we will be finishing the event at the dot of 6. But what we would like to do is to set up breakout rooms where in the group, and we'll probably have 6 or 8 people in groups, you introduce yourselves and then pick out some topic from the discussion that's really resonated with you and share your perspectives and experiences. And some of the issues, we go back right to the beginning. It's what stimulates people to get involved in a STEM career in the first place, where it's different for men and women and where role models help. You might want to talk about the different cultures between academia and business or civil service. So the different experience of managing diversity, different ways of managing knowledge, question of cognitive overload, the value of role models, the connections across generations. There were a lot of issues that came up over the discussion. So do please take those forward in the meetings. If you do have to go though, I can see a lot of people have left. So we're going to be down to relatively small numbers. What we might find is that when you get to your breakout room, there's actually not many people there, because it looked as if they were around when I set them up, but they've gone. If there isn't anyone in your room, come back to the main room. Don't just leave. Come back to the main room by leaving the group, and we'll be able to move you to another group. And we're just going to have 15 minutes in the group and then return to plenary for a final exchange of experiences and discussions. And just to say, this is meant to be a networking event, so do feel free, if you've made a connection, to follow up the contact, whether it's LinkedIn or something similar to that. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I am going to set up some breakout rooms, and I'm going to create 4 breakout rooms. Okay, so you should, 3 actually, you should receive an invitation to join a breakout room any minute now. So I'm just, oh, sorry, I failed to do that. And I hope you enjoy your discussions, and you have about 15 minutes, and then we'll be coming back. And do remember, if you can, switch your cameras on, and we'll have the chats. See you soon.
I accidentally left the room. So it was so sad. So what you were saying about the 80s, when the 80s it became gendered Legos. Oh, you're mute. I think you're muted.
Yeah, so it became more engineering, hands-on and creative, but more violent. And the girls became more passive and more caregiving. And then ultimately there's little figures for the girls that were like dog grooming parlor, soda shop, caring, but not actually being creative. So the boys don't get to be sensitive and the girls don't get to do engineering. So it's detrimental to both.
Wow, yeah. But that's when it starts. It starts you know, the very earliest ages. I think all parents probably need training.
Of guidance, yeah, exactly.
Guidance, yes.
Your 3-year-old daughter can go to a party dressed as a dragon. She doesn't have to go as a pink fairy. And if your son wants to go as a pink fairy, that's just okay too.
Yes.
I think I hope everybody enjoyed the breakout rooms. We didn't actually say who would be in charge for this final bit of the session, but I think it's open really to general conversation and to pick up some of the points that are made, or follow up some of the discussions. I mean, our in the group that I was in, Carol, our discussion of diversity moved on to neurodiversity. Which I think goes beyond even dragons and fairies to all sorts of other behaviors. I just missed that. A little thing flashed up from what Sean's. Oh, pink dragon.
A good combination. I like it. So Ruth, we had a really good discussion. I'm just looking to see. I think I have. Do I have Chris, Olivia, and Nama still on from my group? I don't know if one of them would like to just summarize some of our conversations, which were wide-ranging.
I think you can unmute yourselves. I hope you can all unmute yourselves.
We've got Olivia, Christopher, or Nama. Feel free to jump in.
Go on, Olivia. You just put your camera on.
Yeah, so we had quite a bit of discussion regarding gender and how it's perceived in the workplace, and perhaps like stereotypes that people have that might not even realise, that leads to making like negative assumptions of women when really that wouldn't be the case if they were male. So we had quite a bit of discussion around that, which then led to the discussion around getting women into STEM at an earlier age. So whether the impact of having girls-only groups in high school relating to physics does actually have a positive impact, or whether it's creating more segregation. in the long run. Don't know if anyone else wants to add anything.
What was your own experience, Olivia?
I feel like generally there was definitely a very heavy male dominated classes in like physics, but I think a lot of it is area dependent on whether there is like girls in physics initiatives about it, because I didn't really experience many of those, so I can't really say whether I felt it had a positive or negative impact. And I guess one thing that was quite interesting is that because at university I studied natural sciences, so kind of doing modules in each of the different sciences, it was interesting to see the gender split across like biology to physics was very different. And it makes you wonder, why does biology appeal more to females than physics does, when really, you know, you study all sciences equal up to a certain age when you choose. So at what point does the different sciences become more appealing to the different genders, which is interesting to see.
Sorry, can I jump in here and ask a question? Is there an argument for having single-sex schools as opposed to co-educational institutions?
I think it's a really interesting question, Ben. I think we touched on it a little bit in the main session. I mean, I went to a mixed school and then a mixed sixth form college, and it was okay. I think with my fellow pupils, it was fine. I think it was more the teachers' reactions to us, I would say, with great hindsight. So whether single-sex schools work better for girls than mixed-sex schools do is, I guess, might be one question, or whether it's that teachers treat the pupils differently in those schools. If you've got boys and girls and you bring a gender stereotype and you treat the boys differently to the girls, if you've only got one sex, you'll treat them in one particular way. But equally, I've seen young men come out of single-sex schools and they have not known how to behave in that mixed environment, which becomes a problem later on in life. So I'm not a researcher on this. I'm sure there's some research evidence somewhere on it.
I think the last research I saw was that single-sex schools were better for girls and mixed-sex schools were better for boys, which is not terribly helpful. But I went to a mixed-sex school, and if I hadn't had very strong parental encouragement, I would probably have gone for the humanities rather than sciences. And it's not, I think you're right, it's not because of anything explicit that the pupils do. There were definitely lack of support from the staff and lack of awareness from the staff. And that must have harmed some people who are on the periphery. But I was right plonk in the middle of the science stream as one of very few girls. And I don't know what damage that did, because you talked about fire in your belly, Carol. And there was certainly some of that. But I think there was also always a feeling that I was on the outside. And you know, that was one of the things. I don't know if I'd have had imposter syndrome anyway, or if it just kind of softened up the soft, made the shell softer so that imposter syndrome could leap in. So I don't know.
It's a really good point, Ruth.
Vote on imposter syndrome in the room.
I was thinking imposter syndrome is called blazing the trail. I think your point about isolation is really important. And I've heard Dame Jocelyn Bell Burnell say this, that she studied at Glasgow University some years before I did. She was the only girl in her entire undergraduate class. And when she, as a woman, walked into her lectures each day, all the young men would bang on the table and catcall. Now, that was the tradition. And she said the one thing she learned to do was that she suddenly learned you can actually consciously control blushing. But she said in some ways, the worst bit of that was not any of the catcalling and the banging on the tables. She kind of learned to toughen up to that. It was the isolation because she wanted to talk to her fellow students about physics because she loved physics. And she felt that there was a barrier. She was different, they were different, and she couldn't get past that barrier. And it was a loneliness in terms of sharing those ideas. So I think you're right that sense, if you feel other, whatever that other is, and that other causes a barrier, rather than it being a celebration of difference, it's actually a barrier because the people who all feel they're the same are a little bit scared of you and don't want to approach you, then it means that you can't talk about the subject that you love. And that is limiting. So I think it is about trying to make an environment where everybody can talk about the subject that they love in some way or share those ideas in a safe way. So yeah, I think in the imposter syndrome, you can have a vote. I would also refer you to Dunning-Kruger, and that's the other aspect of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, what you're saying there, Kat, is do you want to unmute yourself and say it?
Yeah, I can do. It's just kind of coming back to the girls thing. I used to work with kids back in my previous role, and I work with kids from 5 years old all the way up to sort of 15, 16, and I noticed that as girls got older, their confidence would generally drop. They kind of felt more pressure. They'd always want to get things right, be perfect the whole time. And so they're almost scared to give things a try, and they would back away from those more challenging things, especially in maths, compared to the guys, and this is in my own experience, where guys would be like, oh, I'll give it a go. If it doesn't get right first time, no worries, I can try again. And I wonder whether that's kind of their thoughts of why girls don't necessarily follow into STEM roles. They perfectly have the capability to do them, but the confidence isn't there because the pressure, they feel the pressure on them.
I think it's a really good observation, Kat, and it's something I suffer. And that perfection paralysis, where you don't feel able to just share an idea. And I guess in my research career, I sort of think of my ideas that the ideas that I'm generating inside me are very precious to me. They're very personal. They're my thought processes. And I always think of it like a little egg, and I wonder whether there's a great little bird inside. I'm not quite sure. So maybe I go to a colleague with my little egg and say, well, what do you think this is? Now, a colleague who is trusted and I trust them with my ideas will say, oh, I don't know, let's wrap it up, nurture it. Maybe it'll crack and hatch out and be a beautiful bird. And the colleagues that I haven't built that connection with will come along and I've experienced it, smash it with a hammer and say, it's not a bird, it's a squashed egg. And you think, ouch. So I think you're right that the risk taking and the consequence of failure, because we learn from failure, but maybe, I don't know if it might have been Olivia in our group who, or maybe, sorry, not Olivia, I'm probably misattributing here, that the women in STEM and the girls in STEM events that we do almost become patronizing and then become too much attention for teenage girls, when actually we should be helping them to be in an environment where they can just experiment. And we did this at the University of Bath because some of my young women astrophysicists who I've hired into my group, and with 50-50 across my group, they noticed that in the labs, again, the girls were minorities, so the students work in groups, sometimes pairs or threes. And of course, often just we randomize them, and rarely were the girls working together in pairs, so they would always be in mixed pairs. And we started to notice that the boys had much more confidence about that experiential learning, getting their hands on the kit. Very few of them will ever have seen any of this equipment before. It's not the equipment we have in schools. So it wasn't that they knew what they were doing, but they were much more confident about having a go. So their learning was much more accelerated. The girls interpreted that as the boys having some extra competence rather than just confidence, and the girls drew back. And the girls were coming and saying, could we get some extra time on the equipment during the breaks? And what one of my lecturers said to her all-female tutor group was, don't mistake confidence for competence. But we then realized that we didn't have the time in the labs, which are very time pressured, to give all of the students the time they needed to really explore the equipment. And so we opened up a thing called the Maker Lab. So it was lunchtime. Men, women, staff, students, postdocs could just pitch up, and we left them with bits of equipment. It was not assessed, which was the key, because the problem in the labs, it was being assessed. And so there was this high achieving students wanting to be perfect. And we left them with Arduinos and, bit boards and a 3D printer. And actually there were many more girls that came to that to get some experience, and it boosted their confidence. So it was taking away the pressure of assessment, taking them out of the mainstream of the curriculum and saying, go have some fun and just get your hands in there and make something and see what you can do with it. Then we started to see mixed teams forming because they wanted to start to make things. So it was quite an eye-opener.
But it's quite interesting. I mean, we at Southampton, they did some research on promotion applications by gender. And they found that actually, though fewer women proportionally applied, they were more successful in applying. And that was kind of the confidence thing, that men would think, oh, I'll give it a go. You know, I may not be that wonderful, but I'll give it a shot, and I'm sure I can blag my way through. Whereas the women wanted to wait until they were absolutely 100% sure that they would get promoted before they applied. So in fact, Southampton, I think Southampton, having slagged off academia a bit, I think Southampton, it has been quite good at that. They did then put in special mentoring sessions to encourage more promotions from women at an earlier stage. And I mean, it's still not the same, but it's better than it was. I think it's just it is a stereotypical gender thing that girls are less confident in their own abilities than boys, and I'm sure that's kind of reflects through what you're saying, Carol.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Sally. I think also the consciously measuring that and then countering it is the really important bit. And I think we were also sort of saying in our group that sometimes it's just something you've absorbed socially and you don't want to be in that situation where you get criticized and put down. Sometimes you may have experienced or witnessed another woman being put down for their gender, and you absorb that not as a gendered comment but as a legitimate comment, and that makes you even more cautious. So it's such a complex mix between perception, experience, and then absorbing all those social messages. And I was just saying in our chat group that when I was head of physics, first woman head of physics, a very traditional department, and it was an exciting, interesting role. It was also a hugely challenging role, and we did a staff culture survey and we were trying to transform sort of culture. And one of the anonymous comments was, I don't like the sound of the head of department's voice when she speaks at departmental meetings. And, well, I can't lower it. I've tried to lower it by 50 octaves, but, it's whatever you do, it's not right, because we expect there to be a man in that role. And so I think that also can really be absorbed into women's confidence.
Well, I think we need to really, yeah, that's right. It's 6 o'clock. So yeah, thank you. I just want, don't go before I said thank you. Thank you, Sally. I think you've done a fantastic job. Yeah, and Carol, you've been brilliant guest. So I'll let you go, Sally, while I just say goodbye to everybody else more in slower time. But you have been a fantastic guest, Carol, and you've really done us proud for our first land lecture. So thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who's still on the call for staying to the end. Thank you all for all of your contributions. If you have got a chance to complete the feedback form, I think you may be able to send it around afterwards as well. Because I always have this anxiety, I've got the wrong link there, but I've put it in the chat again. But thank you all for coming. Thank you all for staying. And hope you've enjoyed it. And big thanks also to, this is for the recording, to Edmund for doing all of the introductions. He couldn't stay right to the very end. And Carol, it's been fabulous. So thank you so much.
Ruth, thank you to all your wonderful audience.
In the Science Council.
Thank you, my pleasure. Thank you for a wonderful event, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Carol.
Bye.